My name is Jan Egeland. I'm the Director General of the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. I have the honor to be your moderator for this day here in the wonderful town hall of Oslo.
International peace and trade are indeed global issues, and I'm pleased to welcome participants from all parts of the world. This is the third annual conference on peace and trade here in Oslo, and we are particularly excited to present this year's program. Today, the Natural Resource Charter will be launched. The Charter will provide guidelines and standards to improve natural resource management globally. The Charter will hopefully have far-reaching impacts on resource management and economic development in all parts of the world. I am honored that this important initiative will be launched here today.
As a Minister of Environment and International Development, I would say there is no other issue which is so close to my heart as the issue of business. For the very simple reason that there is no solution to climate change without business. I mean, technological innovation, technological revolution is the most important answer to climate change. It will happen in business, in close relationship with research institutes and in a market framed by governments, but business is the key to see the necessary steps for the technological revolution to fight climate change. On development, which is the other side of my portfolio, exactly the same. There is no country in the entire world who has developed rapidly without the right mix of a state framing the market and a dynamic business community using the forces within that market. So the need for more trade, more business opportunities. The problem in the world is not that that people are making money in poor nations. The problem is that too few people are making money in poor nations. What the poor nations really need is to be linked up to world trade in the same way as, say, China is, and that you release the dynamic forces of capitalism, but within a market framed by the state. And ethical business and green business, I mean, that's really the challenge now. We should take as our great example what Franklin D. Roosevelt and his generation did. They used the crisis in the 1930s to transform capitalism. Before the crisis, there was basically unregulated capitalism all over the world, and there was very little protection of workers and the social sectors. After the crisis in the 1930s, we got welfare states more or less all over Europe. We got pension schemes more or less everywhere. The market were regulated in a new sense. We got global financial institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And in most nations, business and trade unions started cooperating because they understood that only by cooperation we can move forward.
There is voluminous literature, most of it critical and some of it hypercritical, of the failure of resource-rich developing countries to manage the natural resources with which they are endowed effectively, transparently, and equitably for the benefit of their people. In this literature, the universal assumption is that this failure, acknowledged by all, is or has been caused by corruption on the part of governments, especially of African countries. While this assumption is not without validity, it is only part of the story. Some of the gross mismanagement of natural resources is a result of ignorance, lack of analytical capacity, and technical competence on the part of the host country at the beginning, that is, at the time the decision to extract the natural resource is made. This critical imbalance in negotiating skill and bargaining power between the host country and the extraction investor, especially at the initial stages, admittedly often exacerbated by corruption, has contributed significantly to the unfair and unjust arrangements that have existed in African developing countries. As the Minister has just mentioned, the Extractive Industries Transparency International has now designed a reporting system intended to eliminate or at least minimize corruption and its impact. Now, while transparency will, where it is practiced, minimize opportunities for corruption, it will not by itself optimize the utilization of natural resources, let alone infuse strategic thinking among the host country decision makers for the integration of short and long-term planning objectives. That job, the job of providing guidance of what could be done, how it could be done, and who has to do what, will now fortunately be provided by the Charter, as it objectively prescribes the respective roles of the host country governments, the home governments of extractive companies and capital centers, and the extraction companies themselves. My country, Botswana, has not done too badly, or, as is often said, by the standards of our continent, that is Africa, especially the sub-Saharan Africa, we have done relatively well. I'm therefore going to relate to the story of our mineral development policy as it has evolved over the last 40 years. At independence in 1966, we were among the 20 or 25 United Nations least developed and poorest countries in the world. Our country consisted of, or was composed of, 8 autonomous districts, each with its own paramount chief, its own district commissioner, and responsible for its own education, health, and social services, and physical infrastructure. I think we were lucky in having foresighted leaders in the persons of my predecessors, because our first president, who was himself a chief, supported by his deputy, who ultimately succeeded him, when it became known that there could be mineral resources in our country, the two of them campaigned among traditional leaders and other politicians that natural resources should be vested in the state and not in the district governments, and that the resources thereby derived should be utilized for the benefit of all citizens and not just those from which the resources were derived. And fortunately, they were able to prevail upon their fellow politicians and traditional leaders that this should be so. And so, when minerals were actually developed, first a copper nickel mine, and subsequently, after De Beers engineers discovered diamonds in 1967, a year after independence, the rights were vested in the central government. And because of the campaign and the reasons given by the government for vesting the natural resources rights in the central government, which was that the resources would be used for the development of all citizens, revenues derived from this resource was always in the public's, a matter for public debate, not only in Parliament, but also in places called freedom squares, where politicians argued with one another.